welcome to a pre-recorded chapter 6, as I'm in New York City undercover as the perfect team at a Heidi Klum sex party. It's hidden as a Halloween party, but we all know, we all talk about the side rooms. That's what they do. I've taken over the Illuminati, and they're going to fall flat on their faces tonight, and demons are going to attack them, and it's going to be awesome. So I look forward to that, watching it and laughing my butt off, because y'all just don't even know how ridiculous they are. Okay, y'all, it shall be the duty of the agency to advise, to coordinate, to correlate, and evaluate, and disseminate, and to perform services of common concern. Chapter 6. Admiral Luther H. Frost, former director of naval intelligence, paid a very open and informal visit to Indonesia in 1958, at the same time that his boss, Chief of Naval Operations Arleigh A. Burke, found himself in a most ambiguous position. U.S. Navy submarines were operating clandestinely close to the southern coast of Sumatra, the main island of Indonesia, putting over the beach parties ashore and providing certain supplies and communications for the CIA-led operation against the government of Prime Minister Sukarno. At the same time, Admiral Burke balanced his unenthusiastic support of the CIA by putting his close, confident, and able intelligence chief on an informal and social temporary assignment in Jakarta. Then, to further bracket the situation, Admiral Burke assured for the Navy the chairmanship of a high echelon committee set up by the Secretary of Defense for the purpose of providing support of the CIA during this special operation by placing a 3-star general on the committee, while the other services were represented by officers several grades junior to him. The Air Force had a retired general working with the CIA as a coordinator of all air action in this operation, and the Army had a number of generals, some on active duty and others either on assignment with the CIA or called up from the retirement for similar reasons. But no service so ably circumscribed the moves of the CIA as did the Navy under its most able CNO, Admiral Burke. Although this was an operational activity carried out in deep secrecy, it may be used as an example of how the intelligence community functions. Over the year, it has become customary to speak of the various intelligence organizations within the government of the members of the community. The word is quite proper because there is little cohesion and homogeneity within the vast infrastructure which has cost so much and which performs so many varied and separate functions. The members of the community are the CIA, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force as separate divisions, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the FBI, the Atomic Energy Commission, the State Department, and the National Security Agency. All are by law brought together by the Director of Central Intelligence, or DCI. His title is not the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, although he does head the agency for the purpose of advising the NSC in matters concerning such intelligence activities of the government departments and agencies as relate to national security. This is the DCI's first duty as prescribed by law. He is to advise the NSC of the activities of the other departments and agencies. Partisans may take sides as they wish, but it is quite clear that it was the intention of Congress that the role of the CIA was to coordinate all this intelligence and then to advise the NSC, including the president. There's nothing in the language that would suggest that the agency should become operational or that it should enter the collection business itself, although the CIA has, during the past quarter century, usurped powers that are not included in the law. It is this literal interpretation of the law that permits all of these disparate intelligence sections to operate with a high degree of independence. Thus, we find strong leaders such as Admiral Burke using his own intelligence arm his own way, while at the same time the Navy was rendering support to the CIA in an operation that was very much on the other side of the coin. It was not in the interest of the Navy to become covertly engaged in Indonesia. In addition to the independence, the intelligence community does not have its own pecking order. Much has been written about the behind-the-scenes friction and massive power struggle between the CIA and the DIA. The director of the DIA sits on the board with the rest of the community while the chairmanship of the DCI, but this does not in any manner mean that he works for and is subservient to the DCI or to any part of the CIA. The DCI serves in the direction of the NSC and the president, and the director of the DIA is responsible to the Secretary of Defense, who is by law one of the members of the NSC, and in that capacity is also one of the DCI's bosses. As recently as September 1961, during a meeting with a prominent and important member of the House of Representatives, I was asked, What is the chain of command to the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency? From this man who serves as chairman of a key unit of Congress, this was no artless or idleness question, and other than citing the obvious and the director of the DIA serves as Secretary of Defense, there is no other way to answer that question. If anyone would try to find a niche for the director under a hierarchy headed by the DCI, he would be wasting his time. We find then, nearly 25 years after the creation of the CIA, that it has remained as the coordinator of information and little more. As long as we are talking about intelligence as an advisory and staff function, when we come into the field of clandestine operations and the inner and more secret pecking order of the ST, we find a totally different situation. This is as Alan Dulles planned it. His biggest cover story of all was the fact that he served as the DCI and that his most able agents were not in the field waging an active campaign against the enemies of the U.S., but were serving inside the government of the United States and inside the many greatly influential non-government areas to create a ST that dominated the entire operational activity of the U.S. government in peacetime. The use of the word peacetime in this context is fraught with danger and does not mean that might be expected. There are those who say that we have been at war since 1945 in a great worldwide Cold War, a struggle against communism and other enemies of the nation. But that is not the way the term peacetime is used in the ST's clandestine activity dictionary. The rules of war are traditional and are quite clear and uncontroversial. When the nation goes to war legally by act of Congress and in accordance with these rules, there can be no question about the pecking order and who is in charge of things. The president is the commander-in-chief, and everyone else from the president on down to the private in the uniformed services and industrial and civilian defense worker has his neat role and position in the chain of command as the emergency law may prescribe. But when this nation is not at war, there are no such rules. Historically, if the nation is not at war, it is enjoying peacetime. Therefore, in time of peace, all foreign planning, foreign policy, and foreign operations are supposed to be the responsibility of the Secretary of State and are managed in accordance with overt political diplomatic guidelines. To avoid complications on this theme, we shall accept that there are many other departments of the government that have strong and vital international roles during peacetime, such as the Department of Transportation in the areas of world aviation and commerce, the Department of Labor, the Department of Agriculture, Treasury, and so on. But at the heart of the matter, the Secretary of State is the single government official primarily responsible for the foreign policy of this nation, and the ambassador who serves under the Secretary of State is a single senior official and head of the country team in each country throughout the world. In accordance with custom, international law, and social tradition, when a country is not at war, it is at peace, and the rules of war, which include certain considerations of the necessity for clandestine operations, do not apply. However, in the Cold War era that has persisted since the end of World War II, there is the feeling that we are engaged in a life and death struggle with world communism that verges on real war. At least this is the doctrine of those activists who make a career of promoting anti-communism. Before World War II, there was a wave of anti-communism, but it is more an expression of choice between fascism of Italy, Germany, and Japan, and a communism of Russia. It was fanned to strong during the Spanish Civil War, when the loyalists were for the most part of the side of communism, and the rebels were the supporters of General Franco's version of one-man rule. Since World War II, communism has become a term that is often applied to almost anything, anyone, in any nation, which in the eyes of zealous pro-American is opposed to his views of what is American. Thus, anti-communism is either epithet hurled at all kinds of opponents, real and imagined, and at all kinds of targets, from groups of people to individual political foes. Thus, to these activities, we are living in a special state of war. Inside the ST, this is kind of thinking has created the phrase peacetime operations, which has its own meaning. A peacetime operation is almost always what anyone else would call a peacetime military operation, or such. This is an obvious anarchism and clandestine operation. By using this special term, the ST keeps the command and direction of such operations from the military, where it would be if it were a real and not a covert operation, and keeps it from the State Department by putting it in the classification of a military activity, even though calling an operation in peacetime a military operation does not make sense. All of this explanation may sound to the uninitiated like a lot of muddy logic or contrived magic, But in spite of the difficulty that exists in trying to explain how the ST rationalizes itself into a position of power, this narrative would be less than honest and less than complete if an effort were not made to delineate the unusual and very contrived paths of reasoning that have been built up through the years. Perhaps this can be the best described by an example. Since the early post-War I days, a king of Jordan had been served by an elite guard, usually trained by the British. Several years ago, a few remaining British departed, and King Hussein found himself in a precarious position of having to trust a close and personal palace guard, not only to protect himself, but also to assure compliance with his orders and commands to his military and government officials. And in a manner quite normal in many other countries since the end of World War II, King Hussein accepted military aid from the U.S., and with it had amongst a small number of U.S. military officers whose task was to see that his men were properly trained on the equipment that was given to him. These men worked to raise the standards of competency of his elite troops and recommended they be given paratroop training so that they could be used anywhere in the country quickly in the emergency. The king was pleased with this proposal, and some U.S. Air Force C-130 transport aircraft were detached from the European command to support the training program. Selected American Army and Air Forces officers arrived to set up the training that would be required. They worked closely with the king, who is a good pilot, and especially with his trusted palace guard. In Washington, the State Department was informed of this program and approved it as a worthwhile project to increase understanding between the two countries, especially at a time when the U.S. and Arab relations were badly strained. The Department of Defense was pleased to promote this program because it provided a much-needed contract in the Arab world that might bolster the sagging Middle East defense structure. But neither the State Department or the Department of Defense, except in very limited of offices, knew that among the military training personnel were a number of CIA military paramilitary experts. As recent history has proven, this high-caliber training for the palace guards has paid off and undoubtedly was responsible for saving the life of King Hussein, or at least for making it possible for him to remain in the country in command of his forces during the critical refuge uprisings of 1970. In the case of such operations, the State Department is told that the special training program is part of the military aid program, and unless the ambassador happens to have his suspicions aroused by something unusual, nothing more will be said of it. Most ambassadors never attempt to look into any of these things. They take the view that what they don't know won't hurt them, and even if someone did try to brief the ambassador, he would probably not ask not to be told anything covert, because that would not be his responsibility. It would be the responsibility of Washington. This usually results in Washington thinking the ambassador knows what is going on, so it does nothing, and the ambassador thinks the Washington desk knows what the CIA is doing, so he does nothing. The covert activity that takes place then with no awareness on the part of the Department of State, in spite of what some DCIs have said. In the Defense Department, the CIA will have asked for support of the training project in Jordan without much elaboration. Then they will go to the Air Force for planes and to the Army for men, and perhaps to both for the equipment they plan to use. In this manner, the CIA gets involved in a peacetime operation that really is not clandestine in the regular sense of the word, because the king will know that this was not part of his regular military aid program, and he will have been contacted by a man who identifies himself as being from the CIA. In most cases, this pleases the king or other principal, because he knows that he will be getting something special, and usually a lot better and a lot easier than what a comparable military aid program would cost him. If it were to be done in a normal manner, this project is not covert in Jordan, the king will not tell his military leaders that he has agreed to, but the part of the project would not be clandestine anyhow. This project would be covert to keep it from the Israelis, from other Arabs, or from the Russians, but when considered realistically, this is not so, because the aircraft like the New York C-130 are too big and too peculiar to be seen operating in Georgia for months without giving away the fact that I'm there, that something special was underway. Anyone observing their coming and going would know that the U.S. Air Force was involved in something in Jordan. So the usual classification criteria do not apply. This is where the term peacetime operation is most aptly employed. It is simply a device used within the U.S. government itself to make something appear more highly classified than it really is, in order that it may be directed by the ST and not by state or defense. where it might normally be assigned. Of course, to give itself a reason for getting into such activities, the CIA will state that the men it has in Jordan on such an exercise are really there on intelligence business, and that their activities as trained personnel are truly their cover arrangements. Thus, the CIA is always able to provide a story for any exercise it wishes, once it has obtained the charter to collect intelligence and to enter into secret intelligence operations. This example serves to show the unusual nature and usage of the term peacetime operations. This is no small-time business, and though this example pertains to the Kingdom of Jordan, there have been similar projects in countless other nations. Any attempt to unravel the chain will be demolished of command of the secret team, and more explicitly of the intelligence community, must take into consideration that is not what it seems to be, and it is not what it was supposed to be. Certain it is the most important activities which occur are so concealed within security wraps, and so disguised within the atrocities of the special usage of language such as peacetime operations, that the uninitiated and inexperienced person has no way to interpret what he finds. Only the dominant elite know what they mean. The dominant elite. And what their objectives are when they talk about foreign military training programs. Ooh, I can't wait to hear that conversation. Freaking joke. Or what they mean by a reconnaissance project or a satellite activity. Beneath all of this, the sinews and nervous system of the whole system run through the entire government almost effortlessly. Oh, that's so great. Yeah, I totally get it. Oh my God, you're so smart. Ooh. That's how they operate at those parties. I'm so intelligent. Me too. You are? Yeah. You're intelligent? Yes. Are you intelligent? Yeah. You intelligent? Yes. I'm so intelligent. I'm also sexy too. I'm so sexy, I'm so intelligent, and I'm so sexy. However, they never say anything, but they're sexy and they're intelligent. Yeah, let me go to that party. Don't worry, I'll be there. So while the intelligence community continues to function as a loosely knit group with each component serving its own master, it does come together at the top and does provide the DCI and through him the NSC and the president with advice in matters pertaining to the national security. Under this cover arrangement, the CIA gives lip service to his mechanism while it goes along the channel as it carved out for itself in the direction of the peacetime operations of the government. The CIA has an unsurpassed group of dedicated and devoted intelligence experts within its Directorate of Intelligence. However, even these men and women feel sometimes that they are not part of the real CIA, so remote to their attachment to the major part of their own organization. I've spoken to the DDI men many times about certain areas of interest, careful to protect the security of the boundaries set by their DDP brothers, to find that the men of DDI nothing at all about things that were underway in another wing of the building. Nothing has underscored this distinction more than the chance release of the Pentagon Papers. Pentagon Papers are so phony, and then you guys still talk about them like they're worth something. Except for lies being exposed. We literally had Snowden talking about it, who put value on it. However, they have no value because they're 3 times removed lies. So the only person in history that has actually been honest about exposing our government has been 2 people. That would be Snowden first and me. Sit with that for a bit. Coordination of intelligence, the major assigned role of the CIA. The second major duty of the CIA as prescribed by the law is to make recommendations to the NSC for the coordination of intelligence activities. This has been a continuing concern of the presidents who have been in office since this passage of this act, including President Truman, and has been a major concern of most of the other members of the NSC since that time. It has also been the subject of many special committees and other groups assigned to study the intelligence community and to come up with such recommendations themselves. However, even to this day, there are very little real coordination of intelligence activities. What a waste of money. This is such a waste of money. And it seems that in the late date, there is going to be less coordination instead of more. In 1948, President Truman asked Allen Dulles to head up a committee of 3 to report to the president on the effectiveness of the CIA as organized under the 1947 Act and the relationship of CIA activities to those of other intelligence organs of the government. Oh, it looks like they sell organs too. Y'all are sick. The other 2 members of this committee were William Jackson, who had served in wartime military intelligence, and Matthias Correa, who had been a special assistant to the Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal. The Dulles-Jackson-Correa report was dated January 1st, 1941, and was submitted to President Truman upon his re-election. No report on the broad subject of intelligence in this country has ever been more important than this one was. The report itself was published and bound in either 10 or 12 copies. Not too many years after its publication, efforts were made to collect the few copies that were not then in the CIA and then were destroyed. One copy remained in the office of the Secretary of Defense for many years, but it was typical of such important and such controlled documents that the access sheet that have been with it since its initial distribution contained only the names of various administrative personnel who had handled it during top secret inventory reviews and of a very few others. None of them were really in top-level decision-making offices. It was interesting to note that William Jackson was appointed Deputy Director of CIA after his work on his report, and that Allen Dulles followed him as Deputy DCI in 1950. Dulles remained, that was a throat stab. Dulles remained with the CIA for the next 11 years. It is much more interesting and pertinent to note that this report, which was originally charted to study the effectiveness of the CIA and the relationship of CIA activities to those of other members of the community, really did not waste much time on these mundane subjects. This report laid the groundwork for the entrance of the CIA into the fun and games, quotes, of special operations, peacetime operations, and all the rest. Oh yeah, I'm so glad that you as Hollywood, you as the government, love to spend all our money while you pay no taxes. And then you complain about paying taxes, and then you complain about us. It's pathetic. And in leaving this brief discussion of the second duty of the CIA, one may come away with a distinct impression that the CIA has never made a very high score for its recommendations to this NSC for the coordination of intelligence activities. Correlation, evaluation, and dissemination of intelligence, heart of the profession. The third duty of the agency is one that has been done well, in which it has received the priority that has been given the fun and games. Would have provided the president at all times with the best intelligence in the world, and would have made the CIA of great importance and of real value to the other members of the Security Council. The law charged the CIA with the duty to correlate and evaluate intelligence related to the national security and to provide the appropriate dissemination of such intelligence within the government, provided that the agency shall have no police, subpoena, law enforcement powers, or internal security functions. There is no questioning the fact that this country has the best intelligence capability in the world. It also has the best collection system in the world, and all members of the community span the scope of information gathering to such an extent that we ought never fear the existence of intelligence void. Yet there have been gross oversights and there have been many poor estimates and analysis of situations with all that the intelligence community has going for it. It is remiss in not applying itself more to intelligence, to coordination, and less to special operations. Here also the community's preoccupation with senseless security measures has reduced the area of study and review of all subjects to small groups that do not represent the most qualified men available. Furthermore, these small groups are shot through with irresponsible individuals whose primary interests are not related to the production of quality intelligence. On top of this, all On top of all this, the intelligence professionals have to cope with monumental masses of raw product, much of which is excellent. As a result, vast quantities of this material are buried in security-locked warehouses and have never been looked at and never will be. During the past 20 years, there have been many times when the Secretary of Defense or other military officials has stated that the United States needed to go ahead with the development of a new bomber, a new submarine, or even a new missile system, because intelligence has acquired information which indicated that Russians had such a bomber, submarine, or missile that if we did not get moving to stay ahead or to close the gap, or our defenses would be less than the best. Such a comment has recently been made by Secretary of Defense Laird with respect to a new supersonic bomber the Russians have. Since Mr. Laird believes that the Soviets have such a bomber, he believes that Congress should authorize the Department of Defense to go ahead with a new BI supersonic bomber for the U.S. Armed Forces. Years ago, some of these estimates were found upon review or to have somewhat premature. Critics have pointed out that the military often gave the appearance of working up some story attributed to intelligence in support of weapons system they wanted or to support the annual budget, which may have been under consideration at the time of the release of the new information. The whole area is one in which billions of dollars are involved, and in a final analysis, our very defense posture is involved. Yet the facts are seldom revealed even to Congress, even congressional committees, and huge expenditures have been made on partial information. In the past, this may have been necessary, but at this present time, there can be no excuse for the withholding of such vital information. Any objective and practical reflection upon the subject would confirm the conclusion that such secrets either were not really secret in the first place, or they cannot be kept for very long if they had been a secret. Since Gary Powers went down into the Soviet Union in 1960, the whole world knows that we have been operating high-altitude photographic aircraft. The follow-on XR-1 has been photographed and shown to the public many times, as various times U-2 photographs that have been shown reveal the capability of the cameras of these planes. It is no secret that the United States has been launching satellite observatories for many years, and that one of the primary purposes of these missiles have been to take real, not television, photographs of the Earth's surface. We know that the film capsules are regularly uncovered, usually in the Pacific Ocean areas. We also know that the Russians are doing the same thing, although their photography may be limited to television-type transmittal and reception. But in any event, there can be little in such a mechanical process that warrants the withholding of this vital information from Congress and from the public for alleged security reasons. If Mr. Laird says that the Russians have a supersonic bomber and that it has been observed, then it should show actual incontrovertible pictures and evidence of such a plane. Certainly a development project that will cost $11 billion is so important that it should be initiated on real and valid facts and not on some estimate alone. This is one area where the ST has held it to itself and its own devices information that should be made public. When there is no actual need for the control of such information, the problem is even deeper than this. The information that is obtained by the many intelligence organizations of the United States is so voluminous that not even a small portion of it is properly evaluated. It is possible to read out mountains of information by a computer scanning process, and most of the photographic material that does see the light of day from that which was originally obtained by aircraft or satellite, it has been so processed, but there's so much more that never gets looked at. Satellite pictures are very good, and yet they have some very real limitations. For example, the big Chinese nuclear plant up in north central China was huge, open, drying flats south of the plant. When the plant is in full operation, most of these large areas are wet and in photograph can be seen darkened by water. When the plant is shut down or operating at a reduced rate, fewer drying areas are wet, and the change can be observed. Thus, a programmed pattern of satellites scheduled to orbit over its nuclear plant at regular intervals can produce accurate information about the operation of the facility. I wonder what really goes on there. The photographs themselves are much more accurate than this. It is possible to enlarge these pictures in such a way that small areas no bigger than a bridge table can be identified. For a camera operating in an observatory 110 miles over the target area, this is good photography. Since this photography is so good and since it is easily and abundantly available, there can be little excuse for not making it available to Congress and to the public in order that an informed public, and especially an informed Congress, may know better how to deal with the real facts of the modern world. The law does say that CIA is responsible for the appropriate dissemination of such intelligence within the government. If more time and much more money and effort were spent in correlating and evaluating this type of information, and then in making proper distribution of the product, we would know a lot more about the rest of the world than we do now. And what we know would be based upon solid, supportable fact and not someone's estimate.